Hello. Is my mic working? No. Forever and ever. Okay, maybe it is working. That's good. I thought it was just the fan doing something weird. Hello, everybody. Hello, DM Odd Squirrel. Hello, Sharkspur. Seems like folks are interested in Candela Obscura. That is exciting, because so am I. Here we are at the Quickstart guide. For folks that don't know me, here is some quick bio information. I'm Mike. I stream as Turbo Tango. I'm a author, podcaster, and game designer. I co-host a actual play show called Speculate. And we play a lot of Forged in the Dark games on Speculate. I am currently running a game of Court of Blades, which is a Forged in the Dark game. Thank you very much for the follow, DM Odd Squirrel. It's great to have you. So I'm designing a Forged in the Dark RPG for my fiction series Genrenauts, which I started publishing a few years ago, and it's been a really fun experience. And between running and playing a lot of Forged in the Dark games and designing a Forged in the Dark game, I was super excited when I saw that Candela Obscura had a fair amount of that like design DNA. I was already guessing that that might be a thing, since one of the designers of Illuminated Worlds that Candela Obscura is built on is Stras Acimovic, who is a consulting designer on Blades, credited there, and is one of two designers of Band of Blades and Scum and Villainy, which are two of the earliest Forged in the Dark role-playing games. Both of those are published by Evil Hat Productions, which also published Blades in the Dark. And I'm just going to go to the Candela Obscura page real quick so that I can make sure to shout out all the designers. Where is my Illuminated Worlds stuff? So Illuminated Worlds is designed by Stras Acimovic and Layla Adelman. Candela Obscura is designed by Spenser, Starke, and Rowan Hall, written by Rowan Hall and Spenser Starke, with additional game design by Christopher Gray, Tracy Harrison, and Taliesin Jaffe. So there's some familiar names throughout here. Editor Karen Twelves, who edits on a fair number of Evil Hat games. We can just scroll down here to this copyright page, which has all this information. So we see Karen Twelves, who is a game designer and editor. We have these folks here. We have the Illuminated Worlds design credits here. And so it's important to note that they have this good content note: power, body horror, death, gore, and other sensitive topics. This is a horror game. We get this cool art. And so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to talk through, read through and talk about stuff that's in this Quickstart document, understanding that this is not a full game. This is a preview, very much probably like a vertical slice demo that you might get in a video game, and that if there's something that's missing here, it could absolutely be in the full game. This is just evaluating what we're given, and I'm going to be talking about the strong parallels that I see between what's going on in Candela Obscura and what happens in Blades in the Dark and other Forged in the Dark games. Spenser Starke, one of the co-designers, has specifically on Twitter called out that the game takes strong inspiration and influence from Blades in the Dark, as well as other games. I think Vaesen was shouted out, and then folks have talked about a few other parallels. So I'm mostly going to be focusing on Forged in the Dark because that's where my expertise is as a designer. So we get some lore here. Right off the bat, we are doing horror here. We got investigation. We have a secret society. This is a secondary world, so this is important. We have a setting that is being presented in a way that feels, I think, a lot like London, because we've got the Victorian, some, I guess, the fantasy steampunk, more like gaslight fantasy than steampunk, because electricity is the new exciting technology. And it appears to be, from the setting material that I've seen, just electricity, not like spark-right technology that's in Blades in the Dark and things like that. So I definitely want to shout out here that They put content warnings and safety tools right up front here. They are recommending lines and veils, the X card, and the open door policy, and specifically link to the TTRPG safety toolkit. That's great. I think that it's really a good trend in game design for designers to specifically mention safety tools and content calibration and provide resources, either like larger write-ups or at least linking to existing safety tool material. So that's really handy. So this is for your first game, right? We're mostly looking at the one shot that was provided, or potentially people playing themselves through whatever scenario is being run on the stream on the Critical Role channel. So player, you're encouraged to read through page 16, and then the game master gets everything beyond that as well. We've got rules of the world and rules of magic. These are mostly fictional rules, but this is just some setting stuff that we're talking over, right? Candela Obscura takes place in a world that resembles your own. The average citizen neither knows about nor would believe in magic or its effects. So this is a hidden supernatural fantasy setting, right? Everyday people in this setting don't know about all the magic stuff. And so part of what Candela Obscura is doing is keeping most of the population insulated, both in terms of danger and in terms of information, keeping people insulated from the supernatural. This means that there's kind of a more standard, more recognizable main setting, and then there's like this liminal space where Candela Obscura, the group, is operating at the margins within the existing setting, and then theoretically, at least from the writings that we've seen, they are breaching beyond the flare into these other realms. Sometimes it feels like the bulk of writing these types of settings is just naming things differently. The kids are asleep said. Extremely true. The number of, like, okay, we're going to have different names for magic. We have different names for a barrier between our world and the other world. What are we calling the magical worlds, right? So we have thinnings are when the flare is weakened because the barrier between the worlds is more thin. These thinnings allow metaphysical energy known as magic. Notable, important, we have magic with a K. That's the kind of game we're in. Esoterica, like Western European, like mystical and like secret cult information. So, we're talking about Hermetic traditions. We're talking about Crowley, chaos magic, all that kind of stuff. Very specifically Western and Northern European evaluations of the supernal, the mystical, the supernatural, other realms. Because this is a secondary world, we're not doing necessarily a one-to-one in folklore here. So we have the kind of justification framework, right? Myths, legends, and folktales are stories to explain real magical phenomena. Therefore, people in this setting will have some baseline of information and knowledge about phenomena, but that information may have been corrupted, or there may be, it may be misrepresented in some way. So somebody might have grown up on stories of a banshee, but real banshees do XYZ different. And that gives the GM a good amount of flexibility, because if you're going to be using Western European, Northern European folklore in your setting, because it's maybe most aligned with how the setting is depicted, then you have that flexibility. I think this game, because it's a secondary world, is set up so that people can bring other folklore material to the game. If you're GMing and your cultural background in terms of folklore and mythology and legends is different from that Western or Northern European framework, because that's most of the world is not those places, right? Then you bring in what you grew up with. There is a bit later on, I think not in this section, but in some of the other writing that talks about and encourages players to bring their own cultural heritage to the game, and that is encouraged, but it is also, players are encouraged to be thoughtful and careful when stepping outside of their realm of experience in terms of cultural influence. So I think something else notable in this quick start is that the designers are very careful and kind of consistent in taking a close eye and a light touch toward like heavy social content. So that is, there's specific talking about discussions of and like breakout sections of the book talking about disability that I think, as someone who's not active in disability studies or disability advocacy, seemed pretty good to me as a layperson who tries to be attentive to that. So that is really cool. It was one of the things that really impressed me here. So we've got all this magic stuff. Bleed, I think, is important to frame because there is a mechanical representation of bleed. Bleed is the corruptive force left behind by powerful magic. This bleed also radiates from the phenomena that have made incursions into the world. So when a person has too much bleed, they may be taken over by these supernatural forces, become corrupted, or die. The manifestation of bleed varies based on the phenomenon. This shows up in mechanics, these two sections here. So that's important to know about. Powerful artifacts. There's going to be some stuff about gear that kind of touches on this. Rules of Candela Obscura. This is a group game. Here's your group of player characters. They are a circle, or they are most of the members of a circle. So you have a circle within a chapter, and then chapters are part of the larger organization of Candela Obscura. And this is just more reminder here. I really appreciate this guide is a tool for you to utilize rather than a set of edicts that must be followed. One of the things that I see frequently in a lot of independent TTRPGs is that the designer knows and is upfront about the fact that a RPG book is a toolkit, not a like IKEA construction guide, right? It's not, do these 5 steps and you will have had fun. There's framework, there's encouragement, there's evocative material, and there are perspectives and guidelines. All right, now into the mechanics. This is where the majority of my focus is going to be. So first we have preparation. This is like getting ready to do a game, right? A series of assignments given out by a light keeper, a character played by the GM, right? So we have an in-fiction mission giver for the group, which is the circle. And then these characters exist within a larger social framework of the chapter of Candela Obscura and exist within the larger social structure of the Fairlands and the nation of Hale, are the setting here, the kind of mundane side of the setting. We have pre-gens here, 5 pre-gens, and you're going to need 6-sided dice. 3 of these dice should be of a separate and distinct color. These will be referred to as gilded dice, and the remaining will be known as standard dice. So here we've got a new bit of design technology. This idea of gilded dice is not something that's in Blades in the Dark. There are probably Forged in the Dark games that have like dice that are marked in some different way, because there are a ton of Forged in the Dark games. And if you are watching coming from the perspective of being a Critical Role fan, a critter, one of the things that I want to let you know and really emphasize here is that if you dig what Candela Obscura is doing, there are a lot of role-playing games that playing Candela Obscura and playing Illuminated Worlds will unlock for you, will make it really easy for you to jump from these games in the Illuminated Worlds kind of design style that Critical Role is making through Darrington Press. You can take that knowledge to dozens and dozens of other TTRPGs across genres, across tones, across even some variations in format of what an RPG is. And you can bring this knowledge that you will develop playing Candela Obscura and other Illuminated Worlds games, and it will make it easier for you to just get to have RPG fun in a bunch of different ways. And that's really exciting to me. I'm excited for some of these design elements to get a bigger spotlight on them. And I'm really excited for players to discover other design technology, which they can incorporate into their understanding and their kind of play style, whether that's players or GMs or game designers. You'll need a circle sheet. The circle sheet is one of these other things right here. So here is a circle sheet. I'm just going to slide this a little bit over here. So in Blades in the Dark, you have characters who are scoundrels, and you have a crew sheet representing the resources and capabilities and kind of relative status and dangers that your whole group faces. Candela Obscura mirrors that framework here because we have circle abilities. These are special abilities that your whole group has. And in fact, if you started the game with 4 player characters and you got 4 players, and then somebody decides that they want to retire their character and they bring in another character, that new character is part of the circle and they will get access to these circle abilities too. So when you're playing Candela Obscura, you've got your own character special abilities, but you also have your circles abilities. You're going to be thinking about your circles illumination questions and keys. This is how you get like advancements and get extra stuff, kind of a way of measuring your success, or maybe thinking about it as XP. And your circle has resources. So rather than your character having like, oh, I have 37 gold and 22 silver and 50 copper pieces, really the only resources we're tracking are primarily the circle's resources when we're talking about, like, do you have enough money to buy the thing? Or do you have enough money to live on so that you can recover from your injuries and that kind of stuff? You might have gear that is held by the circle that then can be divvied up to different characters. So you'll need a GM to run this session. Their job is to guide the narrative, control all non-player characters or NPCs, and describe the world. So that is fairly familiar to the vast majority of role-playing games, right? Most RPGs have a game master or a dungeon master or some equivalent person in a role that is like that. Dice mechanics. This chunk of the page tells you the vast majority of what you need to know about what's going to happen when you have rolled your dice. If I have 3d6 and I roll them, I can keep this chart in mind. So and when I roll here in Candela Obscura or in Forged in the Dark games, you roll however many dice you're allotted, and you're going to look for the highest single die. If the highest single die is only a 1 to 3, if you rolled nothing but 1s, 2s, and 3s, the roll is a failure. You don't get what you wanted, and there are consequences, right? So when you roll, you're trying to accomplish something, and there is the risk of a consequence. Risk is something that we'll talk about a little bit later, because this game does have some allotment for varying risks, which is similar to position in the Forged in the Dark design style. If your highest result is a 4 or a 5, the roll is a mixed success. You accomplish what you wanted, but it comes as a cost. There is also a consequence. Generally, that consequence is not going to be something that negates your success, because then you have a null 0 result, which is not necessarily going to be very fun. Like, in what way does the fiction advance if you get what you wanted but you didn't? However, if what you're trying to do is you're rolling to try to catch somebody who is escaping, you're in a chase, you're trying to catch somebody so that you can retrieve something that they've stolen. If you got a 4 or a 5, you might tackle the person, but then the thing that they've stolen gets knocked out of their pocket and rolls and falls into a grate. And so you stopped the person, but there was this other objective that you had, so you didn't get all of what you wanted, right? If I roll to stop this person, I got what I wanted on a 4 or 5. But then there's this complication because I wanted to stop this person in order to get that item back. But because I was rolling to stop the person, the consequence is free to then kind of make a problem for me here. If instead I was rolling to run after someone and pickpocket them to get the item back, and I'm specifically stating my objective there, we might flip this roll where I say, okay, well, I want to catch up to this person and I want to, I want to get this thing back. And the GM might ask, are you more interested in getting the artifact back, or are you more interested in capturing this person? And I say, no, I focused on the artifact. And then I get this mixed result. I might chase them and then get the artifact out of their pocket, but then they they swing a meaty fist and knock me back and are able to disappear behind a carriage. And I've lost the opportunity to catch up to them. I got what I wanted, but I didn't then get everything else. Or maybe I take a mark where I'm chasing, I get the item, and then getting clocked is represented by taking a mark to my body category, right? Where if you take 3 marks, then something bad happens, but we'll get to that. So we've seen a full failure. We've seen a mixed success. If your highest die is a 6, which is the highest a d6 can be, the roll is a full success. You get what you want without any major unintended consequences. This is curious to me because major unintended consequences, does that then mean that on a 6 you might have minor unintended consequences? I'm curious what that looks like. In other Forge in the Dark games, usually the language says, on a 6 result, the roll is a full success. You get what you want without consequence. So this is a little bit of a difference. And I'm curious in play what we're going to see that difference as being, or whether this is in fact intended to be a difference in how play goes from what we might expect from other Forge in the Dark games. I'm not sure about that. I said that you look at your single highest die, but there's a special rule. If you rolled a 6, you'll also want to check and see if you rolled a second 6. If you rolled 2 or more 6s, the roll is a critical success. You get what you want and something extra. So if I rolled a 6 when I was trying to catch up to this thief who had taken an artifact and was running, I want to catch them. On a 6, maybe I tackle them and I've wrestled them to the ground and they still have the artifact. Maybe on a minor unintended consequence, the artifact falls out of their jacket, and so I don't have the artifact yet, or maybe there's the potential for danger for the artifact. Maybe that's a minor unintended consequence. But on a critical success, you get what you want and something extra. So that might be you tackle this thief and they instantly fold and rat out their employer. So you get what you wanted, stop this person because they have the artifact, and then you get something extra, information. So that is an option or an example of what you might get on a critical success in Candela Obscura. So this is the thing that you do when you are trying to accomplish something, right? You and the GM decide an action, you roll the dice, and then you apply this framework. You look for your highest die. 1 to 3 is a failure. 4 to 5 is a mixed success. A 6 is a full success. 2 or more 6s is a critical, where you get something extra. How do I know how many dice I should roll in Candela Obscura? This is where actions come into play. Actions represent your character's proficiency and proficiency at a given maneuver under pressure. Sharkspur says, I run a lot of Monster of the Week and love using options for those unintended consequences. In Act Under Pressure, if they get a 7 to 9, I'll give them 3 options of success. But this will happen too. Yeah. I think this definitely flows from the Power by the Apocalypse design style, of which Monster of the Week is one of those games. And offering options is really fun to me as well when I'm the GM, because I'm letting the player decide the bad thing that happens, right? Because, okay, pick 2 of 3. If it's, well, there's 3 things you want and you get to pick 2. Or I might say, you get more than maybe you were asking for, but this other bad things happen. Yeah, putting hard choices on the player can be really fun as the GM and fun as a player, because you are determining your character's future problems, right? When you're picking one thing over another thing, you can kind of be a shared author or be partially the architect of your character's own frustrations. And for some players, that can be really fun. I have learned to embrace that style of being a TTRPG player, I think largely because I have spent so much time working as a prose writer. As a prose writer, I'm writing novels and it's just me. I am the author. And so if I never made anything bad happen to or happen for my characters, I would have a hard time finding much of an audience, because a lot of people are looking for their characters to face obstacles, to struggle, and to overcome them, to learn and grow, develop relationships, and conflict is really central in that for what I will call the kind of dominant Western storytelling style. We can see this exemplified by The Hero with a Thousand Faces or The Monomyth by Joseph Campbell. There's a lot of problems with that, but it still holds a lot of sway in storytelling within kind of the storytelling tradition that I was raised in and live in. I am trying to expand my horizons, but for the most part, conflict is important in storytelling if you are operating kind of within the English language storytelling world in the US, Canada, the UK, Australia, maybe more or less so in other areas that are English speaking. That gets into a whole other conversation, so I'll leave it there. Actions. You're going to have 9 actions on your character sheet, which is right over here. So unfortunately, in my browser, all 4 of these PDFs are Candela Obscura, Candela Obscura, Candela Obscura, Candela Obscura, because it's Candela Obscura Quickstart game pre-gens, and then they're named other things. So when I look here, here's our character sheet. Okay, we have 9 actions. Move, strike, control. These are under the nerve category. You'll note that for each action, there are some words that describe what this is about. So move, you use this when you are going to run, dodge, or navigate. So I might use move in this example earlier when I am trying to run somebody down and tackle them. I might instead use strike, punch, break, or knock down. And that's going to be the GM's call. And I'll get back around to what's important about that. I might instead be able to use survey, because that's about tracking somebody. But maybe I would have to survey to see where they're going, and then I would have to roll move or strike to catch them. That's going to depend on the situation. Under cunning, we have sway, read, and hide. And then intuition has survey, focus, and sense. Some of these feel like they have some overlap, and that is also something that happens in the Forged in the Dark style. Because there's only these 9 actions, we have 9 actions. We do not have strength, dexterity, intelligence, wisdom, charisma. We do not have the skills system from D&D, right? Athletics, acrobatics, nature, insight, persuasion, so on and so forth, where there's all of those skills and we have attributes. Instead, really we're focused on 9 actions, and then we have some of these other things that just work differently than D&D stuff does, if you're familiar mostly with 5e. The other thing to note in actions is every action has this diamond next to it. If that diamond is filled up, that represents this action being gilded. And we'll talk about that a little bit later on in the action. So we've got 3 of these actions here as an example. If you have 0 in an action, like this character's focus, and you need to roll, and you don't get any other bonuses or don't find other ways to get a bonus die, when you roll 0 dice, you roll 2d6 and take the lower result. So here's the example, and that's rolling 1 die. But if I have a 0 in focus and the GM says roll focus, and I'm not in a position to gain any bonus dice, I roll 2 dice and it comes up a 4 and a 1. 4 is my highest die, but because I'm rolling 0d, I'm picking the lower die. So instead of having a 1 and a 4 and using the 4 because it's higher, I have a 1 and a 4 and I use the 1 because it's lower. That means that rolling with 0 dice, you can succeed. It's just much harder because you need both dice to be 4 or higher to get even a mixed success. Notable is that if you have a 0 and then you get +1 die, you don't roll 2 dice, you roll 1. You go from 0 to 1. So the 0, that holds the space. But any action that you have marks in, that's the number of dice you get. So you don't go 0, 1, 2. You go 0, 1, 2. The number of filled in spaces is the number of dice that you get to roll. And there are ways to get extra dice. So we get some cool, creepy art here. The art throughout and the graphic design in this book is really pretty. This is one of the prettiest Quickstart guides that I have seen in recent years. This is not too surprising, given that Darrington Press is fairly established. They have put out some very pretty books before. They put out art books, right? The Art of Critical Role. There is a strong fan art community around and with kind of the Critical Role space. And so it's not too surprising that we're getting all of this stuff. That helps make the Quickstart guide have just very strong vibes, which is really useful because, like I said earlier, one of the things that I want a role-playing game to do, and I think is very useful for a role-playing game to do, is to be evocative, to help give you ideas and get you excited about doing stuff. So drives are going to be one of the main ways that you get extra dice in Candela Obscura. They are a resource you may expend and replenish during a session. They represent your character's ability to push themselves past their standard capacity. You can spend 1 drive point to add an additional die plus 1d to a roll of an action that drive encompasses. So if we look over here, here we see that we have a max of 3 in the nerve drive. If I have 1 die in strike here, but I really want to succeed with a strike, I could spend 1, 2, or all 3 in this drive and get +1 die for every one of those that I spend. I can tell that my max is 3 here because these are all grayed out. If instead I was rolling hide, I could spend up to 6 on 1 roll. That would be a lot. At a certain point, adding more dice has a diminishing returns effect because of the way that probability operates in practice in TTRPGs. So you're probably not going to want to spend 6 drive on 1 roll, but maybe you do. Maybe you've saved all of your drive and you are making, you're at the end of the adventure and you are trying to sway the vampire lord and convince her to not, murder your circle mate that she has held by the neck. And you really want to succeed in that sway. And you say, I'm going to burn all 6 of my drive in cunning to add +6 dice. And I go from 1 to 7. Maybe you want to do that. Something to note, your dice pool can never have more than 6 dice. So that's actually wrong, right? If I have 1, I could spend 5 drive because that gives me 6 dice. It's probably good that there is a maximum of number of dice to roll. In a lot of Forged in the Dark games, the maximum is 5 dice that you'd roll. All drives have a maximum, which determines the highest amount of points your character can have in that drive. In the character creation section, I think there will be specific instructions on where your drives are going to be and why. but here we just have our pre-gen characters. Another player can also assist you by spending one of their own drive points for +1D. So that means that if I'm trying to sway the vampire queen, right, and maybe I'm out of all of my points on my cunning drive, but other people in my circle have drive points left, they can then each character can spend one drive per roll, but multiple characters can help you carry out the action. It is at the GM's discretion whether your circle members are able to help. Maybe your circle member who is being held by the neck is under so much pressure that that they can't speak, so they're not allowed to help. But maybe they could help by doing something else. Maybe they don't need to speak to be able to help. So there's a number of judgment calls, because what we're doing in this game is we're really focusing on what's happening in the story. I don't know that this game hits it as hard as we might see in other role-playing games, but this feels like Candela Obscura is being presented as a fiction-first game or a fiction-focused game, where mostly what we're doing is we're thinking about what's happening in the world of the story, and then there are moments where we pull back or add an extra layer of consideration that is the mechanics coming into play when there's uncertainty or when there's other specific triggers. So here's an example. Cat rolls with control to see if their character can successfully pick the lock on the door. They have 2 points in this action, and it is gilded. So here's where we're getting the gilded dice thing. They spend a nerve drive to add an additional dice, so now they roll 3 dice, one of which is gilded, and choose a result. The 2 standard dice roll a 3 and a 6. The gilded die rolls a 5. Cat could take the full success, the 6, but instead they choose to replenish 1 point of their nerve and take the mixed success on the gilded die instead. So when you have that diamond in an action and you're rolling that action, you replace one of your dice with the gilded die, a die of a different color. It succeeds and fails just like any other die, but if you choose to you can always choose to use your gilded die, even if it's not the highest. Like generally, you want to use the highest die because you're more likely to get a success and get what you want, but you can get 1 point of a drive back, the drive in the category that you're using, if you take your gilded die instead. So maybe you're in a situation where a mixed result isn't too much of a problem, and then you can take that gilded die like Cat did here so that they can replenish 1 point of their nerve. If you have 1 in an action but you have it gilded, then that 1 die is gilded. However, if you have 1 die in an action, one point in an action, and it's gilded, and then you spend drives, it's just that 1 die that is gilded. I haven't seen anything in here that tells me that you're ever going to get to roll more than 1 gilded die in an action, but that could be a special ability somewhere, or it could be a special circumstance. This is one of the levers and dials that Candela Obscura offers us for being able to make modifications. And this is some of the way of approaching play that I have found to become more natural to me running and playing a lot of Forged in the Dark games. As I look at and come to understand the mechanics more, I can see all the different ways that they can be shifted, where dials and knobs can be turned, where you can go farther on something, or where you can pull back on something. So here's the information about gilded action. Down here, it says you may always choose the gilded die, even if the result is lower. And then resistances. This is a place where Candela Obscura, and I'm guessing, but I'm not sure, Illuminated Worlds diverges more in a substantial way from Forged in the Dark. I'll give you resistances in Candela Obscura first, and then I'll talk about this difference. Resistances are a PC's way of pushing back. So if I'm going to go back to my earlier example. They have an example down here, so you can read that one if you want. Giving more examples, I think, is going to be useful because they're each going to illustrate a different thing, right? I am chasing down that thief, and I want to get the artifact, and I'm focusing on getting the artifact. and I have 2 in move, and the GM says, okay, give me a move roll. And I roll, and I get a 1 and a 3. If I have 1 or more resistances marked in move, so if this is the start of the game and I'm playing this Slink character here, I should have 1 in my nerve resistance, right? We see that this circle is bolded and that circle is not, so that's 1, and this is 2 resistances. For every 3 points of drive max you have, you get 1 resistance. So I could spend a resistance here to re-roll my move dice. Maybe I spent 1 drive. When you re-roll dice because of a resistance, you only roll your action rating. So after spending a resistance, you re-roll the number of dice equal to the rating of the action used for the previous roll. So if I had 2 in move instead here, slightly different, just because I want to be able to talk about this. I have 2 in move, I rolled a 1 and a 3, I spend a resistance. Because my move is 2, I re-roll both those dice. If I had 2 in move and spent 1 from my drive, and I rolled 3 dice and I got 1, 1, 3, I spend a resistance and I re-roll 2 dice, not all 3, because 2 is my action rating. When you spend a drive, it does not temporarily increase your action rating. It just adds dice. And so we have this differentiation. If you used a bunch of drive on a roll, but you're not happy with it, re-rolling with a resistance, you don't get that whole pool. So it is a weaker modification. It's not the same as getting to re-roll your whole pool. You can spend another resistance if you have 2 in that category to re-roll again if you don't like that second result. But that's a lot of resources into one roll. And when you spend a resistance, that is a resource that you have to then spend other things to be able to recover. So if you have 2 resistances in a category and you use them both on one roll, you can't do resistance any other time later in that assignment unless there's some special rule that gives you your resistance back. So abilities are the unique moves available to each character. For the purposes of this quick start guide, you'll only have the 3 abilities available on each pre-generated character sheet, right? So for our Slink, we have your role and your specialty. So every character has a role, and every role has 2 specialties. So you pick between those 2, and then you get 1 ability from your role and 1 ability from your specialty. For this pre-gen, we only have the criminal type of Slink. So they've selected the scout ability for your pre-gen Slink. They're just going to have this ability. And it says, if you have time to observe a location, you can spend 1 tuition to ask a question. What do I notice here that others do not see? What is in this place that might be of use to us? What path should we follow? These questions are very similar to the gather information questions that are listed on each of the playbooks in Blades in the Dark. A lot of Forged in the Dark games give you specific questions that are flavorful and in theme for the type of character that you're playing. The playbook. Playbook is sort of a character class. There are some differentiations, but for this conversation, they do basically the same thing. When you're the Slink and you have the scout ability, you don't even have to roll to get information. You can just spend 1 drive out of your intuition category. So here's a question. Does this character not have any drive in intuition? Right? If you're a scout, shouldn't you have drive here? So I would probably rule, if I were running this game, that if you have this ability, we're going to move 3 of your drive max to intuition so that you have that resource that you can use. Otherwise, this ability doesn't do anything unless then there's something else that will give you intuition drive points. I haven't seen that. It could be something that a GM just decides to do and play. Something that I want to encourage people coming to Candela Obscura from games like D&D 5th edition or what I think of as more traditional RPGs is to approach the game like a game designer and to look at the game and go, does this make sense for my table, for what we're all doing together, especially if you're the GM? And if you find something in a game that doesn't make sense to you, have a conversation about it, right? When I'm looking over this character sheet, if I'm going to bring this game to the table, I'm going to look at this character and go, okay, this doesn't work for me. I'm going to move. Let's see. So you've got 1-1-1, 1-1-2, 3. Okay, so I get why maybe this character's drive is up here and here, but I really want them to be able to use the scout ability. So I might either say you can use a cunning drive. It's kind of like you're reading the space instead of surveying. Or I might say, I'm going to move 3 of the drive max to intuition from cunning so that this character is well-rounded. They have 3 drive each in the 3 different categories. Yeah, so I think you could observe a location, use the intuition to get that question, and then do something else maybe to get information about that space. But survey is really the action for me that makes sense for observing a location, right? What else would I do? I might read, but read is interpret body language, spot lies, gather motive. That seems to be more about people, right? So survey feels more like the action that's about seeing what's going on in a place. What do I notice here that others don't see? What might be useful to us? What path should we follow? Maybe what path should we follow lines up with read, but overall it really feels like we're using survey here. Intuition is the category that contains survey. So that's how I'm reading the special ability. The criminal specialty within the role of Slink has these 2 abilities. So if you're playing or if you're running Candela Obscura with this kit, when you hand this character sheet to somebody because they're playing the Slink, they get to pick whether they want to have street smarts or leverage. Street Smarts says, you know how to keep an eye on your surroundings. Whenever you make a survey roll, you may spend any drive instead of only using intuition. So I would say that if a character had Street Smarts, I would let them spend from any drive on Scout. That's not what the rules say, but that is kind of me reading between the lines. And that's a way to make it so that this ability is usable without having to move drive points around. Because it also has other uses, right? You can, when you do it to make a survey roll, not just when you're using Scout, because otherwise that's like 2 abilities to have 1 ability, which I don't know that I like that. So instead, I'm going to look at it this way, where I read this ability as letting me solve a problem that otherwise I feel like I have with this character sheet. And it may just be a typo. This is a quick start after all. Or I may be misunderstanding something based on, my reads of the game. This seems like something where there's a problem, but I may be wrong. Or you can have leverage. On a successful read roll, read being in cunning, you may ask the GM what your target truly wants. On any sway rolls you make using this information, you also add your current cunning resistance. So let's walk this through. So I have the leverage ability, and so that means that I'm really good at swaying people when I have a good read on them. I have figured out what the leverage is. So if my character uses read and I go, okay, I've got 6 drive and read and I have 1, I'm going to go ahead and spend 2 drive on this read roll because I know that I have leverage. And if I get to succeed, I will get to add 2 more dice, right? I to interpret this as add a number of dice equal to your current cunning resistance, because The resistances don't get depleted when the drives get spent. So I'm trying to read somebody. I have 1 in read. I spend 2 drives. I roll 3 dice. 1 plus 2. I get a 1, a 4, and a 5. A 4 or 5 is a success. It just means you get to reroll using the resistance ability, surely. No, I don't agree with that interpretation. Add your current cunning resistance. Add it to what? This, I could be misreading. I'm reading based on how I approach Force in the Dark abilities and the way that they are written. When you use resistance, you are not adding. You are re-rolling, is how I interpret it. So let's say I got 1, 4, 5 on that read roll. I succeeded on the read roll. Maybe there's a consequence that's not important for this example. On any sway rolls you use, you make using this information, using the information from what the target truly wants. Then I can, so I have sway of 1, I have my 1 sway, and then my interpretation is that I would add a number of dice equal to my current resistance. So that would be 3 dice. However, based on DM Odd Squirrel's note, I am going to go back and let's look at resistance, and let's look at how they talk about resistance to see what the text is saying, because we have a difference of interpretation here. And I have my take, but there's no guarantee that that's correct because I'm not the designer. This resistance does not go away after, let's see. Anytime you don't like the result, you may choose to spend a resistance. After spending resistance, you re-roll the number of dice equal to the rating of the action used for the previous roll. You may not include the dice from any spent drive or assistance you initially received. If the action is gilded, you may still roll with a gilded die. If the action you're re-rolling has a value of 0, you roll 2 dice and take the lower result. You must accept the result of this new resistance roll unless you can spend another resistance to roll again. For me, nothing in here says add. But when you get plus 1d, you add an additional die. So I'm really focusing on the keyword add here, and that I think that is what we're supposed to interpret street smarts as being. But that is a really good thing to note, and I'm just going to briefly hop over to my secret document, and I'm going to make a note about what to ask on the Discord, because there is a Candela Obscura Discord that is available that people can go to. Yeah, I think on character sheets, abilities are usually written in the most condensed form that the designers can imagine, because space is at a premium in a character sheet. Yeah, DM Odd Squirrel says, I do wish that ability said add that many dice or something more clear. I would agree. Presumably, if we're adding dice with stream smarts, we can't go over 6, so rerolling might be stronger after all. That's true. That there are going to be circumstances where that's the case. I think because when you get drive back by taking the gilded die result, drives are going to get spent probably faster than they are getting replenished, because you have more of them, and then you only get 1 back per roll if you use your gilded die. At least that's what it seems like we're dealing with here. Okay. I agree that I don't think the game is going to break either way. Sharkspur asks, it does say add current cunning resistance. So if you have 2 resistance to start, but you've already marked 1, then you'd add 1 die to your sway roll using the information you gain from leverage, right? That is my interpretation as well, Sharkspur. Because current is the ones that are not marked, right? When you spend drives, you remove them. When you spend resistances, you remove them. And so if I have spent 1, then I look at this line and I go, well, I had 2, but I have 1, and that's my current. So I agree with that interpretation. Okay. Roles and consequences. The primary engine of the game is built around action rolls. These occur during moments within the narrative when the results of a player's decision are unclear. Action rolls should not be used for every move a character makes. The investigators in Candela Obscura are competent and highly trained, more than your average person within the setting, so you shouldn't roll the dice for unhindered actions such as walking down the street or climbing a ladder. That being said, if you're trying to remain hidden or there's a monster chasing you, it's probably going to require a roll to avoid the danger while you do it. So if you had, say you have your slink character and they are trying to climb up to the 3rd floor to like spy down on somebody, if they're just climbing up the side of a cobblestone wall, I probably don't make them roll that because they're a criminal. Of course they can climb up a wall. If there is a torrential downpour and they want to climb up a 3-story wall, even if it's got handholds, maybe that takes a roll because now there are extreme extenuating circumstances that are going to make this harder. To be able to do that climb, it would take an incredibly skilled person, or it would take a very skilled person getting lucky. So there is when I'm going to look for a roll. Ultimately, it's up to the GM to decide when dice are rolled and which actions are used. However, as a player, you can make suggestions or ask for a roll to achieve a desired result. This is a major difference from Blades in the Dark and most Forged in the Dark games. In Blades and most Forged games, the player is ultimately the person who gets to decide what action they are using. There may be some negotiation back and forth with the GM where if I say, well, I want to use read to figure out what is dangerous in this place, even if there's no humans, because spot lies and gather motive, I should be able to make jumps of logic and identify the kind of human implications of the stuff that's there. And I say I should get to use read. In Candela Obscura, the GM could say, no, that's survey. If you want that information, roll survey. If this were Blades in the Dark, the GM could go, okay, if you're going to read to get that, I think you're going to, and then there's some other stuff. In Blades, there is something called effect where you can have more or less effect. That doesn't in Candela Obscura. So this fact that the GM ultimately decides when dice are rolled and which actions are used means that this is a game that is driven and controlled more by the GM than a lot of other Forged in the Dark games. Candela Obscura is more like a lot of traditional TTRPGs. When I say traditional, this is not a value judgment. This is just by numbers, the majority and historically, GMs have had that level of authority. Forged in the Dark games and games that have that flatter authority curve are uncommon and have become more common over time as opposed to less common over time. Here is an element that is like Forged in the Dark. I love, this is just an aesthetic note. They put a typo in here so that then there could be a note that is a dialogue between characters. So that's a fun bit, especially I think in a Quickstart guide where there are going to probably be more typos in this than there would be in the final book because it's just earlier in the production process. So that's a hat tip to the team that put this together. So every roll has stakes. Is this roll low stakes? Is this high stakes? And that indicates how dangerous the consequences might be and tells you which action to roll, right? The GM sets the stakes and tells you what to roll. Okay, if you want to climb up to the 3rd story to look in on the cultists, that is going to be a high stakes roll using move because there is a torrential downpour, and you could fall from 3 stories up, and that could really mess you up. The player might then say, well, maybe I don't want to do it if it's going to be high stakes, because maybe they don't want to have to do something quite so dangerous. Normal actions are normal. If the GM has not said otherwise, we should probably assume that the stakes of a roll are normal. Sometimes, if a roll is low stakes, you might ask the question of why you're asking them to roll. If it's, there's some line between so low stakes that it's not worth asking for a roll, and low stakes but it is worth asking for a roll. And that's going to be a judgment call for the GM. Do you think that, and the advice that I would give is, when you think about what could go wrong, you can come up with useful answers. Something could go wrong that either escalates the situation and makes the stakes of future rolls greater. Like, maybe on low stakes, you will catch the attention of a guard. They haven't seen you, but they saw something. They don't know exactly where you are or who you are, but they saw something out of the corner of their eye. And because you failed that low stakes roll, now the fiction has shifted and things have gotten a bit more dangerous for you. This is kind of some of the technique that you would use in Forged in the Dark games. In Forged in the Dark games, this is framed as position. The GM sets the position of the roll and what your effect would be. We don't have effect here. That's fine. We put it aside. So there's a little bit of this calibration where the GM can communicate to the player what to expect if the roll creates consequences. If you make a roll and it's low stakes, the GM should probably not be putting your character in incredible peril if you get a consequence. But if the GM says that the roll is high stakes, you should expect that if you get a consequence, the GM is not going to pull their punches. You're probably going to be taking a mark, or you might be put in a really, really bad position. You might be cut off from your people. You might lose something really important. You might lose an opportunity, things like that. In watching like an hour and 20 of last night's Candela Obscura game, the first 2 consequences were marks. Like Matt said, okay, in this case, your consequence is you take a mark. In both cases, it made sense to me that a mark was something that you could add. I'm curious to discover through play where that sweet spot in giving marks as a consequence versus giving other consequences is going to be, because I have found that in running Forged in the Dark RPGs, just giving harm is not often the most interesting consequence that I could give. In that example that I made of the low stakes roll leading to attention from a guard, that's a different type of consequence. That's not a mark. That's about what is happening in the world in response to your action, and it's not about what has happened. It's not directly impacting your ability to function as a agent of Candela Obscura, right? A different version, if this were a high stakes roll about like traversing the rooftops in order to get somewhere because you're racing against the clock, maybe a failure on a high stakes roll to like evade notice could be a mark to brains, because it's representing the stress of knowing that you're racing against the clock and then you've been noticed by somebody. And that's really bad, right? Because both fictionally you've been noticed and you're taking that mark. And that, to me, feels appropriate for a high-stakes role. The game does not talk about giving multiple consequences for one role. There's more granularity to this in like Blades in the Dark and a lot of Forged in the Dark games. But this is me bringing my perspective as a designer and as a role player to this game, right? If I run Candela Obscura, it's probably going to feel more like a Forged in the Dark game than it might feel if a number of other people are running it. And that's just a difference of interpretation. Neither of these are more or less correct, right? just because Matt Mercer is the first person to run a Candela Obscura game in public does not mean that you can only run Candela Obscura games like Matt Mercer. Just like you don't have to only run D&D like Matt Mercer. His style works for him. A lot of people like it. You don't have to do what anybody else is doing. You can bring your own perspective and your aesthetic and your interests to your GMing. And I would encourage you to do so, because then you are offering what you can offer instead of trying to do things the way that somebody else is doing them because you think that's what you're supposed to do. There's a lot of room for interpretation and individuality. So this is some stuff about character creation. This is a little bit of a preview of what the rest of the game is going to be like here, right? We know that there are 5 roles and each role has 2 specialties. So if you have a group of 6 players, there are going to be 2 characters that have the same role, right? Because there's only 5 roles. So if you have a face, a muscle, a scholar, a slink, and a weird in your group, and then you get a 6th player, you're going to double up somewhere. But if your face is a journalist and the new player wants to play a face, you should encourage them to play a magician or to consider another role where they can play the other specialty from the character that exists. This is so that each character can bring the special abilities that they have in their specialty to the game, and it gives you more of those options, and it lets the characters be differentiated from each other in the mechanics and not just in the fiction. Because then the mechanics will also inform the fiction and magnify those differences. Any combination of these roles can make up a circle. Each role and specialty provides starting values for actions and drives, as well as a list of available abilities. Those also set your resistances, because you have 1 resistance per 3 max you have in a drive, right? So first you set your drive maxes, and then you derive your resistances from those drive maxes. That's how I understand this game to operate, because that's what's marked here, and I believe that it's written in the book somewhere in here. So on character creation, this is a really important note, so I'm going to hit this note too. When crafting your character, it is crucial to avoid harmful stereotypes often present in the historical and horror genres. For instance, if you're creating an explorer, they should delve into their own cultural history instead of appropriating another's. Similarly, mediums should not use other cultures' attire as a costume, and doctors should not indulge in any historical practices that are rooted in racist and ableist ideologies. Although PCs may be ill-disposed, tactless, or even cruel, you should always strive to construct your protagonists with integrity. I think this is a very strongly worded and productive statement, both because it encourages players to operate in this fashion, construct your protagonists with integrity. It is encouraging players to consider their own cultural history and what they bring to the story, to consider the fact that historical fiction and horror genres have a lot of harmful stereotypes that exist in the genre's history and in many cases today, right? In any given genre, there are works that are written in earlier times that reflect the dominant ideologies of those times, right? Misogyny is less prevalent in fiction in 2023 than it is in 1893. If we're looking at like English language publishing in the US, Canada, and England. Progress is not linear. There are a lot of things that come out of this, but the most important bits are that from the beginning, when you're making your character, you're being encouraged to consider cultural context, to consider kind of the forms of bigotry that exist in the touchstones that we're drawing from to play this game, right? Because touchstones are really important when we're playing TTRPGs, because we're imagining what's happening, each of us, and it's happening mostly in our respective brains. And maybe we have a VTT that helps us give some context. Maybe you've got music, maybe you've got some other things that help bridge that gap between each person's individual imagination, but being able to bring touchstones to the table is really handy because it gives you like a palette to draw from. If your palette includes material that kind of carries or includes unexamined instances of these harmful stereotypes, you have to be really conscious to not accidentally reapply and recreate those harmful stereotypes in your fiction. This is going to be really helpful in order to play a game that everybody can feel safe being involved in, right? If you have a group that is 4 white people and 2 people of color, but all of the white people are doing a really good job to keep historical racism in mind and do what they can to avoid it, they are not going to accidentally make the game less fun for the players who are people of color, Black, Indigenous, people of color, or other groups, because all sorts of folks, right? If the players, if you have BIPOC players in your game, and hopefully you will, because that's most of the world, and it's cool to play with people who have different backgrounds from you if you are not BIPOC. If a player says, I want to tackle a marginalization that I have, then that's a conversation that the table can have, right? If a player wants to confront and overcome racism, and they're, Black, Indigenous, and or person of color, then that's a conversation with the GM about whether the GM is comfortable being able to do that, whether the GM thinks that they are capable of doing that in a way that is true to the fiction but not accidentally or unintentionally harmful, then maybe you do or don't want to do that. Similarly with ableism, homophobia, transphobia, any number of other kind of harmful stereotypes or historical inequities in these fictional genres. So, medical sexism. I think the racist and ableist is a non-exhaustive list, unfortunately, because there are many, many challenges in the world. So there's a couple of extra mechanical bits here that are getting a little bit more into the fiction and the setting, and I'll talk about them a little bit and then do some overview. Connections are the bonds you establish between the characters at the table during character creation. Assign relationships between investigators, ask questions about their shared goals, and interweave characters' backstories to foster more engaging gameplay. So it says here that the full game has a defined method for building relationships. But for the quick start, you're just going to have a short conversation, or however long you want, and you're going to identify these relationships, right? So if I'm playing the criminal and Triffity Mats, who I know from other things, is a mod at my friend Greg's channel at twitch.tv, Arvin Elleron, as well as being part of the Skiffy and Fanty show and being active in fan communities. If Triffid and I are playing in a game together and I'm playing the criminal and Triffid is playing the professor, on my sheet as the criminal, I would put down Triffity Mat's character's name here, or I might put the name here, and then I would put the relationship here because I want to have more space to talk about the relationship. So a criminal and a professor. So I might say that my criminal is a former student of the professor's. And so that gives us a starting relationship to play, right? Triffity Mat's character knows my character from when they were a student, but then their life has changed. My criminal character may have looked up to and may still look up to the professor as a mentor because they had this student-teacher relationship, but then maybe things have changed. Are they still, do you still go to them for mentorship? Even though your life is very different? Are you now in a position that your criminal activity assists the professor in some fashion, even outside of your Candela Obscura work? Having these prompts to think about your character's relationships is really fun. I think it's very productive for roleplay, especially for a one-shot, because it will give you something to hold on to. If you haven't spent time with a character before, and you're going into a one-shot, but you're playing with 3 other people, right? And so I know that I'm a former student of the professor's. I procure materials for the magician, And I guess is a medium, I think, might be the other ability here. So I'm going to go to explorer. I went on an expedition with the explorer and they saved my life. And so that gives me 3 starting relationships where these are notes that I can refer to as, when I'm interacting with this other character, what is a thing I should keep in mind that will inform how I relate to this character? And that's very handy. So we have marks here. If you fill all the marks, you write a scar, and then when you take a scar, you move 1 action point from one action to another. So you don't lose total action points. You instead react to your circumstances. And there's a whole section here. Let's see, where's my thing about harm and marks? Yeah. So this page is great. I think this is very thoughtfully, compassionately, thoroughly written evaluation of ableism and disability and how scars work in this game. Right, gives you a number of examples of what you might do to fictionally explain the change that happens for your character as a result of one of these scars. So I would definitely encourage GMs running Candela Obscura to make sure to review this section really thoughtfully before you're running your game. So gear and inventory works very much like Forged in the Dark games. It's almost the opposite of a lot of traditional RPGs where when you're making your character, you also get all of your gear. You buy this, in Shadowrun, you have this many monies because of the choices you made or whatever, and you make a lot of exhaustive choices. That can be really fun. But in a improv heavy game, it may be easier, it may be more productive to have what your character has on hand to be determined by fictional necessity, to decide it in the moment. That if I'm playing the explorer character who is muscle, during each assignment choose up to 3. Going into the assignment, I can imagine that my character has any of these, but I don't have to explicitly state that they have any of those things until it comes into play, right? Or until it impacts the fiction is another thing we might say. So we're on an assignment and we realize that we're being chased by monsters, and then there's a cave-in, and now we can't get back out, and maybe there's a cave-in ahead of us or whatever. This is just a fictional example, right? When I realize that I need excavation tools, I can say, hey, GM, I have excavation tools. I'm going to tick this 1 gear, and now I still have 2 options left. Or you find your character in a fight and you go, oh, I really need a weapon. It turns out I brought a hand weapon. So you don't get to have all of these, but you can have any of them when you need them. And then you make a decision. You establish that you have this thing. You fill in that circle, and then you can fill in up to 3. There's space for extra things. There are circle gear, options for circle gear, that gear that your circle gives you, or maybe you brought back from a mission or something like that. And I find that this is a really fun for improv because that way you don't run into situations where a character looks at their sheet and goes, oh, if only I'd brought X. Unless you've marked all of your gear, your character absolutely brought X because it's what's expedient in the fiction. If we think about heist fiction, which is what Blaze in the Dark is, and that's kind of the influence that I'm seeing being drawn here. And any of these times that I'm talking about seeing influence being drawn, that is my analysis. It is not a statement of fact. There are places where the mechanics are identical or near identical, but that does not mean that there was a specific choice that was a 1-to-1. This is just how I'm seeing it. So I'm not trying to put words in anybody's mouth. But in this in this question of gear, I would be surprised if this was not the specific influence, especially with Spenser Starke talking about Blades in the Dark being a substantial influence on Candela Obscura. And given that Acimovic is one of the designers on Illuminated Worlds, because we are only looking at a Candela Obscura book and we don't have a Quickstart or anything else for Illuminated Worlds, I can't be sure whether something that's in this Quickstart is specific to Candela Obscura or if it is from the kind of core infrastructure, core design elements of Illuminated Worlds. So we're just guessing. We're working with what we have. So we talked about connections and gear, and then marks. Damage to a character's health is tracked using marks, and there are 3 categories of marks: body, brain, and bleed. They are described here. There are 3 available marks in each category. If you should need to take a mark and can't because that track is full, you erase all the marks in the track, become incapacitated in the scene, and immediately take a scar. So this means, I was wrong earlier, you can take 1, 2, 3 ticks to body, but then if you need to take a 4th, and body is full, then you take a scar. You erase everything in body, you mark that, you write in your scar, and your character is out of the scene. So it means you can take 3 hits to each category, and then 1 more hit anywhere will take you out of the scene. So you could theoretically take 9 marks across an assignment and not be out of play. You'd be really worn down. You'd be really beat up, but you're not out of play unless you take that 4th mark in a category. So there is some like meta progression and like group resource thing here, right? You're going to have a circle name and ability, and then we have illumination questions. So I'm going to jump back over here. Circle sheet is here. So you're running Candela Obscura. I would, because of the way that the circle works, I think you probably want to make individual characters first because it's more specific, it's more personal. Oftentimes when I am running Blades in the Dark or another Force in the Dark game that has like this organization sheet that has the group sheet, the crew sheet, like this circle sheet is, we make the group first because everybody's part of the group. This is getting everybody on the same page. I don't know that I think that the way the circle sheet works requires that same choice because of what is and isn't here. But this is just a quick start. It may be different when we get to the full game because really the choices you make are you name your circle, you maybe decide your location, but the GM probably has something to say there, and you pick your circle abilities. You're going to have your resources that you get somehow. But first, let's look at the circle abilities. So these are things like your circle has 3 gilded dice at the beginning of every assignment you may add to any roll. Once a die has been rolled, it is expended. So this is a way you can get extra gilded dice, right? If I have my move action gilded and I have 1 in move, then that 1 in move is gilded. If I use the 1 more gilded die from stamina training, then I add that gilded die, and I interpret that as take +1d on the roll, and that die is gilded. The designers may not mean that. They may mean that you can turn a die into a gilded die, but again, I look at add, and the only place that add shows up with relationship to dice and rolling that I saw was when you use drives, which is adding extra dice to the roll. So that's how I interpret it. Once a die has been rolled, it is expended. So these don't stick with your character, right? You get a bonus that is gilded in this one instance. So you have this extra ability for people in the group to recover their drives because they're able to roll these gilded dice. They're both more likely to succeed and more likely to be able to recoup a drive. I would say that if you have 2 gilded dice in a roll, you're still only going to pick 1 as your result and get a drive back. Except I would interpret that if you rolled a critical and 2 or more of those 6s were both on gilded dice, I would say that you could take 2 drives back, 2 drive points, because when you roll a critical, you basically are using both of those dice, is how I interpret it. So that makes criticals with those extra gilded dice even more powerful, because normally you're only going to have 1 gilded die because there's only 1 diamond on a character on a sheet by the action, right? Sway can't be double gilded unless you have a special ability. There has to be something else that makes it that you could have more than 1 gilded die on a roll, like from stamina training. Nobody left behind. When a member of your circle takes a scar and drops incapacitated, any rolls a player makes in the scene to protect them or get them out of danger have +1d. So this one I think is fairly straightforward, right? Takes a scar and drops incapacitated. This is specific mechanical language that we've looked at just now in the book here with marks and scars. Forged in Fire. There is a Blaze in the Dark ability that has basically the same title, but it does something different. When you help an ally on a roll, if they don't succeed, you both earn back 1 drive point of your choice. So if both you and they have spent drive points, you don't need to roll gilded dice to get drive points back. If the roll does not succeed, you each earn back 1 drive point of your choice, and it looks like that drive does not have to be in the category, the drive track of the action that was rolled, right? 1 drive point of your choice. Additionally, I would say that if you had a gilded die, I'm adding, right? When you help an ally, if they don't succeed, you both earn back 1 drive. So my friend is rolling. They roll a gilded die. They take the 3 that's on the gilded die. They fail. They regain 1 drive in that action because of using a gilded die. And then, because of Forged in the Fire, both they and I earn back 1 drive point of our choice. Whenever there's these special abilities, I think of them as extra rules that either override or add on top of existing rules in specific circumstances. Interdisciplinary, when choosing a new ability during character advancement once per campaign, each character may choose an ability from a character role or specialty outside their own. So this lets you pick an ability from someone else's sheet, right? So if I'm the explorer and we had that circle ability, I could take Ghost Blade from Occultist. It's a different specialty and a different role, but then I get to add it. All right, we're almost done. Looking at circle stuff. I'm just going to skim these abilities real quick. That doesn't matter. This is about the resources. 1 last run. Oh, so this is cool. I like this. When you select this ability, the next time you fill your illumination track, your circle will retire from service. Everyone takes all 4 options during this character advancement. When you take a character advancement, each character can choose 2 options. There are 4 options. This says you get to use all 4. But this is 1 more job, 1 last job. Whenever you advance, you pick one of these. So I would guess that in a lot of cases, 1 last run is going to be the last ability that a circle takes because they want to keep playing. Or the group decides, hey, I think we're getting ready to be done with this campaign. Let's take 1 last run and let's have a big mission next. Everybody gets those character advancement options to gain more and expand on their character's abilities. And we as a group are making an intentional choice to say, this is going to be this next assignment is going to be our last job. Though, I correct myself here, the next time you fill your illumination track. So that's not necessarily 1 last job, right? We need to look at advancement. It says 1 last run, but it doesn't necessarily it's not only necessarily going to be 1 last run. So let's look at advancement. Circle mechanics. Okay, so this is the equivalent of, this is our experience system, basically. Each character sheet has illumination keys. I believe that these are derived, let's see, does it say what they're derived from? Role or specialty? Okay. I would guess that the keys are derived from either role or specialty. Because Explorer is a muscle specialty and Study an artifact is a key, I'm guessing that these derive from the specialty, because the idea that every muscle gets XP if they study an artifact doesn't sound as right to me. That sounds way more specific to the Explorer. So at the end of a session, when the way that we do XP, instead of XP getting certain XP for this many traps, this many monsters, this chase scene, you look at your character's keys and you ask, did I study an artifact? Did I discuss history? Did I run into danger? For each of those, you are going to mark one illumination, right? Ask him after each assignment. So this is after an assignment. You're going to gain illumination after an assignment, not at the end of every session. So that's a good note to myself if you have assignments that last multiple sessions, or if maybe you do 2 assignments in one session. Maybe that can happen. For each after each assignment, the GM asks the 3 illumination questions on the circle sheet, and for each answer in the affirmative, the circle earns 1 illumination. The GM then asks how many players fulfilled at least one of their illumination keys. These are the prompts at the bottom of the character sheet that guide the roleplay of that specialty and unlock a path toward advancement. If nobody fulfilled any keys, no illumination is earned. If only part of the circles fulfilled theirs, you get this many. If everybody fulfilled at least one. So I'm curious whether an individual character hitting more than one of their marks has an impact. I may have been mistaken on that. When the illumination track fills, it is erased, and then any extra illumination is carried over. So that track is here, right? I think we start here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 is a milestone. So milestones may have mechanical benefits depending on what abilities your circle chooses. So we look at milestones. When your circle hits a milestone on the illumination track, earn back 1 stitch, refresh, or train resource. So that is a place where illumination comes into play. There might be different types of circles, and who have different circle abilities and have different things that interact with milestones. But this is the illumination track. So you'd have to fill all of this, right? The next time you fill your illumination track. So this could be several jobs. And maybe that's why it's one last run instead of one last job or one last assignment. We interpret there. So when you fill the track, players then choose 2 different character advancements individually, and the circle chooses 1 new circle ability together. So you can add 1 action point, up to 3, add 2 drive points, take a new ability, gild an additional action. Okay, so you can end up with multiple gilded actions, more actions at higher levels, higher drives. It's interesting that it's 2 drive points but not 3, because every 3 drive max you have in a category, you get 1 resistance. So you'd have to take this advancement twice, I think, to gain a resistance because of the relationship between drives and resistances. Look at that here. Between assignments, players also have the chance to clear their marks, refresh their drives, and train other characters by spending their available Candela resources. So you can heal your character's marks, fill one player's drives. Interesting that it's, one player, one character. I'm not sure about the language there. You can train to gain 1 bonus die that you can use on any roll in the next session. So that's not about refreshing resources. It's about gaining a new resource that is like this floating bonus. Circles start with an amount in each of these resources equal to the number of circle members plus 1. So if we have 4 characters, we have 5 as our available max in each of these 3 categories. These resources are not refreshed until the elimination track is completely filled, so use them wisely. So if we look at this, the elimination track filling is probably going to take several assignments. So we're going to look at that resource pool as not the resources for each assignment. It's probably more like every 3 to 5 assignments. the exact pacing there is going to depend on your game, because illumination gain depends on keys, right? Because you have the illumination keys based on how well the group hit their keys. Also, at the end of every assignment, for every yes, fill in a point on the track. So you have the circle questions, and then you have the question about whether the group. So let's see. If you can... So I think let's figure out the max, because we have these questions. For every yes, fill in a point. So you can get 3 from here, and then I think you can get 4 from character keys. So I think you can max out at 7 per assignment, right? Because I think these are not mutually exclusive, because these are different sections, right? At the end of every assignment, ask these. Also, this one. So let's say if on average we say yes to 2 of these 3, and on average, so I'd say our minimum is probably going to be 3 illumination per assignment, I would guess. 1 out of 3, and some but not all players fulfilling an illumination key. And so, yeah, that 7 is the milestone, which we see applied in the resource management ability. I haven't seen other places, but there might be character special abilities that interact with milestones, right? Mechanical benefits depending on what abilities your circle chooses. We could theoretically have something that interacts with milestones on the character sheet rather than the circle sheet. This suggests that we won't, but maybe we will in the full game. Assignments. So we have those resources that we can spend. This is our section on scars. This is more of that section. We have some example scars that we can refer to here. Bleed scars. These are like overtly supernatural, or mostly overtly supernatural, right? People have hypermobility, have elbows that bend backwards, and that's just people. It's not necessarily common, but it's not supernatural. Purple blood, probably supernatural. Vampiric teeth. And then this all gets into setting. So I'm not focusing on setting, and I'm not going to spoil the adventure. So that is that. I'm going to take a drink. And then I'm going to take us to a character sheet. So, something that is talked about in the short video from Spenser is catalyst and question. Catalyst is what happened that brought your character into or let them find out about Candela Obscura. So this is like a background element. And then question is, what is the question your character is seeking to answer for themselves through their participation in Candela Obscura? So that's like a motivation, or I would say drive, but drive is already a mechanic in this. So a motivation or a goal, I'm going to say. Style is like, I'm guessing as like describe your character's look, right? Because in the actual play that Critical Role is doing, everybody's in costume and everybody's looking really cool and fancy. So you put your character's style, because maybe you don't have the material to be able to cosplay as your character, but you want to keep that character's visual style in mind, and so you write it down. So when we're playing Candela Obscura, we have our actions, and that's the primary way that we engage with the world and we try to change the fiction. We say what we want to do. I would generally encourage that players state what they want to do in the fiction, and then the GM will say, okay, you can do that, or that'll take a roll, or maybe they say that's not possible. But ideally, what you're asking for is something that is either you can just do, or it might need a roll. When you roll, you look at how many action dots you have filled up in that action. So you'd have 2 and move here if you're the explorer. You check to see if your action is gilded. It is here. So I take 1 standard die and 1 gilded die. I see that I have my drives here, so I can add dice to my roll up to a maximum of 6. as a 1-for-1 by spending drives. So I have my two dice from 2 points in the action of move. One of them is gilded, one of them is not. And then I can do up to 6 dice total. I have 6 drives. So if I rolled control and I have 0 in control, but I have 6 drives, I could blow the entire drive pool and roll with 6 dice. DM Odd Squirrel, I would also love to have the full character creation rolls. I get why we don't have them yet, because maybe not everything is done. I think that if you really wanted to do other stuff, I think that it's possible to reverse engineer a lot of this, right? We look at all the character sheets, and then we see how many action points total do they have, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay. So it looks like we get 9 points in actions, and looks like everybody gets 2 gilded actions to start, right? You get 1. Oh, interesting here. So we have 2, and then we have 4 over here. So you don't have to take your drives in sets of 3. But it looks like every character starts with 9 points in drive, right? 3 plus 6, 2 plus 3 plus 4, 3, 3, 3, 3, 3, 3. So it looks like you get that. We know that you get 1 ability from your role and 1 from your specialty. And that's basically character creation, right? In terms of the mechanics. Now, if you wanted to play a character who is a slink, but they're the other specialty, you're going to have to come up with your own special abilities and maybe your own new illumination keys. So that's a bit more work. I think, okay, so we see over here on gear, the criminal has forged documents and burglary equipment and body armor. The professor has research materials, laboratory equipment, and small mundane invention. However, bleed detector, hand weapon, and bleed containment vial are the same across all of the roles, but then each role. So I wonder whether professor, magician, occultist, explorer. Okay, so muscle, explorer, excavation tools. So I'm guessing that these 3 are from the specialty and not the role, because explorer getting excavation tools, again, makes more sense than muscle getting excavation tools. So you might need to come up with the 3 specialty gear items for the other specialties, because otherwise everybody gets these 3 options as a baseline. So that's how I would reverse engineer character creation if I were going to do that for Candela Obscura. And maybe that's even how character creation works for Illuminated Worlds, right? If you want to take this core and take it to another genre, but you like these elements of design versus like picking up an existing Forged in the Dark game. Now, if you like this design and you want to try it in other spaces or other genres or other tones, it's going to be easier, I think, to find an existing Forged in the Dark game and play that than it is going to be to reverse engineer beyond a few, beyond the kind of the steps that we've talked about. I would be very happy to chat in the Darrington Press Discord to talk through like an extrapolation of character creation, right? This is not, it won't be like, we'll each bring our own perspectives and, understanding. This is not in any way, shape, or form me saying that like, I'm going to be able to tell what the final result is going to be, nor am I saying what it should be. This is just it'll just be an understanding, right? So that we can all play the game the way that we are looking to do it. So that is that. I think this game is pretty cool. I am excited to play it. I am excited to watch the rest of the session from yesterday. I am gonna, probably after this, I will hop over to the Darrington Press Discord and we'll ask that question about the street smarts ability that we discussed to see if the designers come by the Discord and feel like answering a question, then maybe we'll get an answer there. I don't want to demand people's time, but that's probably the best place to ask the question. as a reminder, you can get this Quickstart document, basically all of these documents, right? There's also this reference sheet here, which is like this is like the cheat sheet to look at if you're playing. You're playing with 4 people, print this out twice, cut this down the middle, and then hand the half each to the different people, right? If you're playing with 4 people, you're going to want to print out these character sheets. You're going to print out 2 copies of this. You're going to print out 1 of these, and then you're going to have this book on hand, whether you print it out or just, you keep it digitally, however you're going to run it. And there is an adventure in this Quickstart guide that you can run that I have started looking at, but have not read thoroughly, because maybe I'll do another video that's talking through the adventure. Yeah, I think PDF editor, I have a Excel, or I guess it's a Google Sheets spreadsheet for a different Forged in the Dark game, and I might make a copy of that and then modify it for playability. I think the design on these character sheets is very pretty, so I'd love to use them if I can. So it's going to be a question of what's the best way to be able to do that PDF editing online, and especially what I would want is to be able to have those PDFs editable by the player of the individual character and by me, so that I can go in and make an edit if I need to, or I can explain something to somebody. We could theoretically use the Roll20 API or the kit for a Forged in the Dark game, but there's enough differences that you're going to have some challenges. Where do you put drives? How do you mark that an action is gilded? Where are you putting marks? So there's enough differences. It's not a 1-to-1 Forged in the Dark game. There are some Forged in the Dark games that are very, very similar to Blades in the Dark, where you can kind of use what exists for something else. Yeah, I think this is a great candidate for a Theater of the Mind game. You just have to figure out what tools you're using for everybody to be able to keep track of their own stuff. If you feel confident that all of the players are going to be good within their own stuff, or you have like screen sharing that you feel good with, then yeah, everybody just having the PDFs and editing the PDFs on their own, totally fine. I think that works great. I know some people use like Miro as not quite a VTT, but as a good way to be able to like edit stuff together, because like they already use it in their day jobs for like project management or whatever. I haven't really done that for an RPG yet. So that's that. I'm going to pull up the page. So as a reminder, you can get all this Candela Obscura material at darringtonpress.com/Candela, Candela. Candela Obscura is a game by Darrington Press, designed by Spenser, Starke, and Rowan Hall, written by Spenser, Starke, and Rowan Hall, credited as Rowan Hall and Spenser Starke. That's probably just to be fair and even. Illuminated Worlds game design is by Stras, Acimovic, and Layla, Adelman. I apologize to all of those folks if I got anybody's names wrong. That was purely out of ignorance, not out of any malice. There is the quick start, or the how to play video on the Critical Role YouTube. There's this quick start guide material that we've seen. There is Candela Obscura merch that you can get at the Darrington Press stores. It's very pretty. The design and graphic stuff that they have going on here is pretty cool. That is all of that. I am hoping to do a Candela Obscura game for Speculate, the actual play show that I am one of the three hosts of, along with Brandon O'Brien and Gregory A. Wilson, 2 friends of mine. We're all science fiction fantasy writers. Brandon is also a poet and an editor. Greg does a lot of Twitch streaming on his channel at twitch.tv/Arvin Elleron. I realize that I misspelled Twitch here. I'm going to have to fix the command. And I GM a Forged in the Dark show called Valorword, which uses Court of Blades by a couple of Drakes. If you are curious to see a Forged in the Dark game in play, I would encourage you to go and look at that YouTube playlist and go to the thing marked Session 1 and look for when we dive into scene. I run my Forged in the Dark games, I think, pretty much in line with the design philosophy as I understand it, with some places where I make interpolations or extrapolations. So I think that Valorword is a good place to go and look if you are curious how I think about Forged in the Dark games puts into practice in terms of GMing and playing. So that's there. We have other stuff that we do at Speculate. We play games outside of the Forged in the Dark tradition, though that is kind of one of our favorite because it's some of my favorite games and some of Brandon's. And then you can find out more stuff about Speculate at speculatesf.com. There's that. Again, I am Mike Underwood. My main work is as a novelist. I write science fiction and fantasy adventure stories like this. This is Celebromancy. It's the second book in an urban fantasy series that I wrote. And it just happens to be the novel of mine that was within arm's reach. So you can find out more about the stuff that I write at michaelrunderwood.com. Hello, Tamlin. Good to see you. Thanks for coming by. Thank you to everybody who has joined us today as I talked through some thoughts about Candela Obscura, looking at the Quickstart guide. All of this material and the Quickstart stuff you can get access to for free. Darrington Press has made this all very easily available from their website. So that's all really cool. So I'm going to say thank you to Tamlin, to Sharkspur, to The Kids Are Asleep, to DM Odd Squirrel, to Triffity Mats, and I'm just going to scroll up to try to catch any other people who are here. So thank you to all of those folks. Thanks especially to anyone who may be joined from the SPG Discord from when I talked about that, or are here from Darrington Press or anything else. And thank you to folks who are watching the VOD. Thank you for watching the YouTube. If you are a YouTube person and you like getting your video on YouTube as well, then you can, I'm just typing in my YouTube here. You can become you can subscribe to the channel, the free follow thing, not the extra paid thing, at that address there. And then my ending page will also, let's get this back. This video will show up on YouTube in like 24 hours. I do other stuff. I do game design streams for my own TTRPG stuff. I do some like discussion of TTRPGs, how to play, how to run, philosophy of game design, talking about other new games, things like that. And I also stream video games sometimes. And the video games thing is mostly like a chance to get to hang out and chat with people and play video games, because this is my office. I work from home. My coworker is my dog, who is a very lovely friend, but is not super talkative. And this, streaming and talking about games and playing games with people is one of the main ways that I get my social interaction and get to hang out with people and talk and meet people. Hello, Arudinel. Yes, that's the, if you see that wagging dog tail, that is an animated emote made in the image of my dog Oreo, who is very cute. So that's that. I am going to pull up another Twitch page since we have some folks here and we have some new people.
That was fun.
There's a lot of good.
Mute that page. And I'm going to say, let's go raid Space Valkyries, who is a variety video game streamer and somebody who has been a good friend and supporter of my channel here. So I'm going to do that. I would love it if you could join the raid and go and say hello over there. And the message that you can send would be Team Turbo is here if you want to join the raid there. If you don't want Zelda spoilers, it's totally understandable. I definitely get it. So otherwise, thanks again so much for watching. If you want to follow the channel and see other stuff that I'm doing, that's fantastic. Check out other things on YouTube or look at Speculate. Again, thank you very much for hanging out with me and talking about this game. I will see you later. Here we go, in 10. I'm not going to do the whole countdown.